Hey, it's Alan, and I just wanted to let you know that you can now listen to the ongoing history of new music early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hi, I'm Alan Cross, and for the next few weeks of the podcast, we're going to dive deep into the ongoing history archives. There are more than 1,000 shows in there, and many of these programs have not been heard for years. So, welcome to an ongoing history of new music archives podcast with a series called The Top 100 Moments in New Rock. Now, bear in mind that these shows originally aired in the spring of 2004, but we thought it might be fun to hear where we've been, how things used to be, and how much everything has changed since. We hope you enjoy this look back in time.
This is the sound of history.
The councils, they ban my concerts and they take my money.
I can't help but have a soft spot for Ziggy Stardust. Not that I'd ever want to portray him again, but it certainly was sort of fun at the time.
Well, apparently we've been told that we've got to stop now and we have to go because there's some trouble outside.
And I looked hidden through the glass door, and there's this guy laying there with a shotgun laying on his chest and blood running out of his ear.
This is another special project of the ongoing history of new music. The 100 Greatest New Rock Moments Ever. Part 5.
This is the ongoing history of new music podcast with Alan Cross.
Hi there, and welcome to part 5 of a 10-part series on the greatest moments in the history of new rock. I'm Alan Cross. These shows are about the big things and the small things and the weird things that have changed the development and evolution of this music. It could be a tiny nuance kind of thing that eventually sends things spinning out of control. I mean, you've heard about chaos theory, right? No? How about the butterfly effect? Okay, let me explain. It begins with a meteorologist named Edward Lorenz, who ran some equations through a computer and noticed that tiny, tiny deviations in his numbers eventually led to unimaginably large changes in the outcome, making it pretty much impossible to predict just about anything. This is where the idea of a butterfly flapping its wings comes in. As it flits about a flower in, let's say, northern Ontario, those little wings produce a tiny change in the atmosphere, little tiny vortices. That sets up a cascading series of changes, which eventually add up and spread around the planet, leading to, or so this theory goes, a cyclone in Indonesia. Or that flapping may stop that cyclone from happening. We'll never know because the weather is, it's chaotic. Bottom line is that it's never possible to predict the future with any kind of certainty because you can never take into account everything that might affect any given outcome. Moment number 60 is a lot like the butterfly effect. Legs McNeil was a fan of some of the cool underground music that was happening around New York in the middle 1970s. His favorite band of them all was the Dictators, and he wanted to come up with an excuse to hang out with them. And his solution was to start a fanzine, and that way he'd have a legitimate reason to meet and interview the band. Or better yet, it might be a way to get into shows free and maybe get to drink for free too. So he and a buddy got to work, and their first choice for the name of their fanzine was Teenage News, after an unreleased song by the New York Dolls. But then they figured that the name should have something to do with the Dictators, because after all, that was the whole point of the zine, right? So they picked up the Dictators' Go Girl Crazy album, and they started staring at it. And the artwork contains a shot of the band and their buddies inside a White Castle hamburger stand. Everybody in the band was wearing their old-style leather motorcycle jackets, and they all looked like a bunch of wise guy punks from the 1950s. You know, like Fonzie on Happy Days or Marlon Brando in The Wild One from 1953. So that is when Legs and his buddy decided to call the magazine Punk. Now, Punk turned out to be a pretty hot fanzine amongst the underground music fans in New York, thanks to features on performers like the Dictators and Lou Reed and the Ramones. In fact, Lou was on the front cover of the first issue, which came out in January of 1976. And I love the first editorial. This is how it went. Kill yourself, jump off a cliff, drive nails into your head, become a robot and join the staff at Disneyland, OD, anything, just don't listen to disco. Educate yourself, read Punk. And pretty soon, anyone who was featured in the magazine was being referred to as a punk band. It was shorthand. When someone asked what kind of music you liked, you could reply, I like groups that they write about in Punk magazine. And from there, it was just a quick step to saying that you like punk music or punk rock. And from there, well, it was just kind of like the butterfly flapping its wings, if you know what I mean. So let me play you this. The group that inspired the modern usage of the word punk when it came to rock and roll. These are the Dictators from 1975 with The Next Big Thing.
I don't have to be here, you know. I don't have to show up here. With my vast financial holdings, I could have been basking in the sun in Florida. This is just a hobby for me. Nothing, you hear? A hobby.
I sound them everywhere that I sing. 'Cause you know, baby, I'm the next big thing.
New Rock moment number 60. The origins of the word punk as an adjective for hard, fast, primitive rock. Moment number 59 happened on live television. It was December 17th, 1977. The Sex Pistols had been booked to appear on Saturday Night Live that week. It was supposed to be the kickoff to their first ever North American tour, but then they got nailed at immigration for improper paperwork and with questions about various criminal charges. They couldn't make it. So in a panic, the producers of Saturday Night Live booked this guy named Elvis Costello and his band, The Attractions. You can play on the show, they said, if you promise not to play that song Radio, because, well, you see, NBC owns a lot of radio stations, and we can't have you trashing the network with your song. And at first, Elvis said, okay, mate, whatever you say, I'll do my British single Less Than Zero. But you got to think that Elvis had his fingers crossed, because that's not exactly what happened that night.
Calling Mr. Oswald with the swastika tattoo. There is a vacancy waiting. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there's no reason to do this song here. Radio. 1, 2.
Great New Rock moment number 59, the night Elvis Costello screwed the producers of Saturday Night Live. Moment number 58 is remembered as the day The Clash screwed their fans. That's a bit unfair, but you got to remember when this happened. Back in the beginning, around 1976 and 1977, The Clash were seen as the most uncompromising and the most ideologically pure of all the British punk bands. If you looked at them the right way, you could say that they were so socialist that they were bordering on communist. But then the unthinkable. The Clash got in bed with a major multinational corporation. The date was January 26, 1977. That's when The Clash signed a major record deal with CBS. That was bad enough for the faithful, but when they heard that the deal was worth £100,000, more than £75,000 higher than the other competing offer, everyone started yelling, "Sell out!" Now, like I said, this was pretty unfair, especially since the Sex Pistols were being cheered for gouging multiple record labels for huge amounts of cash. And the fans weren't listening to The Clash's explanation. They maintained that they were going to corrupt the music industry from within, which they ended up doing, by the way. But back in January 1977, the howls of punk protest could be heard all across the UK. The day The Clash allegedly sold out, January 26th, 1977. New Rock moment number 58.
I hate the civil service rules. I won't open letterbox for you. Career opportunities.
The Clash from their 1977 self-titled debut album. And when we come back, we'll move through New Rock moments 57 through 55, all of which have something to do with the Sex Pistols. Back in a sec. Welcome back. This is part 5 of the 100 greatest moments in New Rock. And the next 3 events all involve the Sex Pistols in some fashion. Number 57 will be familiar to anyone who's ever seen the brilliant movie on the Manchester music scene called 24-Hour Party People. Early in the movie, we're told of and shown a gig the Sex Pistols played at the Lesser Free Trade Hall just after 7:30 on the night of Friday, June 4th, 1976. Even though the tickets were just 50 pence, less than 50 people showed up. But those who were there were inspired to do whatever it was the Sex Pistols were doing. In the audience that night were future members of the Buzzcocks and the Pet Shop Boys and Joy Division and New Order and a bunch of lesser bands that would soon be making punk rock for England. Didn't seem like much at the time, but this failed money-losing gig became a turning point for English rock. The Sex Pistols gig at the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester, June 4th, 1977. New Rock moment number 57. If that early show was memorable, so was the Pistols' last show in San Francisco on January 14th, 1978. The Pistols' American tour had been a complete disaster. Audiences were hostile. Sid Vicious kept getting so wasted that he managed to get beat up by his own bodyguard. Manager Malcolm McLaren was a pain, and everybody basically hated each other. The whole event was captured on film in the movie The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. It shows a band at the end of their rope and literally ready to blow apart. In fact, they were just hours from blowing apart. Someone, somehow, had been cheated. And Johnny Rotten had a pretty good idea about who the real victim was.
That cover was blown. For the first time, our publicity had worked against us. We had become the most important name after the President of the United States. And that night, in Winterland, in San Francisco, the Sex Pistols played to the whole world. It wasn't a rock and roll party. It was more like a dying horse that needed putting out of its misery. We raised that horse's head and choked the living daylights out of it. This is no fun, no fun, it is no fun at all, no fun. Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
The Sex Pistols and their final show at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. New Rock moment number 56. All right, so it really wasn't their last show, but it was the last time we'd see them together for almost 18 years. And it was the last time we'd see them with Sid Vicious, because 13 months later, he'd be dead of a heroin overdose. Here's one more Sex Pistols-related moment, which brings us to number 55. And it's not about the Pistols themselves, but about their manager. Before Malcolm McLaren hooked up with the Pistols, he and his partner Vivian Westwood owned a clothing store in the Chelsea area of London called Let It Rock. And they specialized in two things: bondage gear and sex toys, and clothing for teddy boys, which was a fashion clique in London. On a 1975 trip to New York to show off their stuff at a fashion fair, Malcolm took a side trip to CBGB's to see what all the fuss was about. And that's where he ran into Richard Hell, the former bass player for a group called Television and the current bassist for The Heartbreakers. What drew Malcolm to Richard was his sense of style, or what Malcolm thought to be Richard's sense of style, because, well, you see, Rich was actually so poor that he'd wear his clothing until they literally fell apart. And once they did that, he'd hold the ripped scraps of cloth together with safety pins. And Malcolm thought this was a grand fashion statement. So he took the idea back with him to England, and he and Vivian started selling creations that were held together with things like, you guessed it, safety pins. Fledgling British punks flocked to the store, which was, by now, renamed Sex. And they started either buying this stuff or making their own at home. After all, how tough is it to tear up some clothes and stick everything together with safety pins? And we all know how that played out. Malcolm McLaren's fashion encounter with Richard Hell. New Rock moment number 55.
Triangles were falling at the window as the doctor cursed. He was a car too long, forsaken by the public eye. The nurse suggested her daughter that I breathe my first. The doctor grabbed my throat and yelled, "God, it's a late to cry. I belong to the blank generation and I can take it or leave it each time."
New Rock moment number 55. Courtesy of Richard Hell and Malcolm McLaren. 4 more moments for this installment, and when we come back, we'll look at the beginnings of one of the most infamous couplings in the history of rock and roll. We're almost at the halfway point in our look at the top 100 moments in new rock, and moment number 54 is the very beginning of the whole Kurt and Courtney thing. Courtney Love first saw Kurt Cobain when Nirvana played a show at the Satyricon Club in Portland, Oregon. The date was January 21st, 1989. They hooked up briefly when Kurt unceremoniously helped himself to Courtney's pitcher of beer. They talked a bit, and afterwards, Kurt told friends, "I thought she looked like Nancy Spungen." She was Sid Vicious's old girlfriend before somebody, maybe Sid, killed her. Anyway, they talked, and Kurt gave her some Nirvana stickers, and from that point on, Courtney had a crush on Kurt. Courtney was friends with Jennifer Finch of the band L7, who was a former girlfriend of Dave Grohl. And one day, Courtney told Dave that she liked Kurt, and Dave told Courtney that Kurt kind of liked her. Kind of sounds like high school, doesn't it? Anyway, that's when she gave Dave a package to give to Kurt. It was a bunch of seashells and pine cones, along with some miniature teacups and a doll, all jammed into a box that was shaped like a heart. On May 29, 1991, 1 month after Nirvana signed their major deal, Kurt and Courtney hooked up again at a Butthole Surfers show in Los Angeles. There was instant attraction, especially after Courtney decided to punch Kurt in the stomach. That led to some wrestling and kicking, and afterwards they shared some drugs, Vicodin and high-powered cough syrup, and from that point on they were pretty much inseparable. And we all know how that turned out. The day Kurt met Courtney for the very first time, January 21st, 1989, in Portland, Oregon. Kurt and Courtney hook up for the very first time. New rock moment number 54. Moment number 53 also has to do with Nirvana. Before he joined the band, Dave Grohl was part of a group called Scream, but they broke up in September 1990, right in the middle of a tour, when the bass player bailed because of girlfriend problems. This left Dave stranded in Los Angeles, and desperate for a gig, he called his friend Buzz Osborne. Now, Buzz was in a Seattle band called the Melvins, and Dave was hoping that he knew of any openings for a drummer. Now, it just so happens that one of Buzz's friends was having drummer issues. He gave Dave the bass player's phone number. Dave made the call and was invited to come up. So Dave packed all his drums into a big cardboard box, grabbed his only bag of clothes, and headed up the coast to try out for this weird little band called Nirvana. He auditioned at the Dutchman Rehearsal Space in Seattle on September 25th, 1990, and he got the gig instantly. His first gig with the band was at the North Shore Surf Club in Olympia, Washington on October 11th, 1990. Now, all the pieces were in place. No one knew it at the time, but Nirvana was now on their way to becoming the biggest rock band of the 1990s. The day Dave Grohl unexpectedly got the gig with this weird little band called Nirvana, September 25th, 1990. New rock moment number 53. Moment number 52 involves the internet. Webcasts and streaming are no big deal these days, but back in 1994, this was the stuff of science fiction. It seems that the first ever internet-only concert was performed by a bunch of computer engineers at Xerox earlier that year. They were just a bunch of nerds who decided to play a gig for, a bunch of other nerds. All right, fine. But what about the first professional band to netcast a concert? The answer seems to be a Seattle group called Sky Cries Mary on November 10th, 1994. It was messy and glitchy and the audio was bad, but it made history. It was a technological triumph. The first ever internet-only concert by Sky Cries Mary. New rock moment number 52. Sky Cries Mary? You probably never heard of those guys, but on November 10th, 1994, they made history by being the first ever band to perform an internet-only concert. Sky Cries Mary with New Rock moment number 52. One more for this show, and this one involves a riot. On March 20th, 1990, Depeche Mode was scheduled to appear for an autograph session at a record store called The Warehouse on La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles. And outside, the crowd, which had been gathering for 2 days, kept getting bigger and bigger. By 9 o'clock that night, the crowd was so big that traffic was stopped. There were kids all over the parking lot and the street. They were up in the trees and on the light posts. And to take care of all this chaos, there were 30 security guards. Depeche Mode arrived exactly on time, but the moment the crowd saw them through the window, everybody surged forward, pushing and screaming. And there was so much pressure on the long row of plate glass windows at the front of the store that it looked like everything was going to cave in. Organizers tried to keep everything under control, but by 10 o'clock that night, it was obvious that the situation had become dangerous. There were anywhere from 20 to 25,000 people in the parking lot. And that's when the decision was made to shut everything down.
Well, apparently we've been told that we've got to stop now and we have to go because there's some trouble outside. And I'm sorry, I apologise to everyone, but the police are shutting us down.
When the crowd realized that the autograph session was canceled, they went nuts. Bricks and rocks and bottles started flying. 2 large neon signs were destroyed. Bits of trim and plaster were literally kicked off the building. 150 members of the LAPD were called in, all wearing full riot gear. People scattered everywhere, leaving debris and damaged cars in their wake. And when the dust finally settled, 7 people had been sent to hospital, and the record store was left with a bill for $25,000 for the cleanup. It became known as the Depeche Mode Warehouse Riot. New Rock moment number 51.
Now let my body to the moving. Let my hands do the soothing. Let me show you the world with my eyes.
The Great Depeche Mode Riot in Los Angeles, March 20th, 1990. New Rock moment number 51. We're now halfway through our list of the 100 greatest moments in the history of New Rock. Let's recap the last 10. Number 60, the launch of Punk magazine. At 59, it's the infamous Elvis Costello Saturday Night Live episode. Number 58 is the day The Clash signed their major label record contract. At 57, the Sex Pistols at the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester, while their 56th moment is the Pistols' last show in San Francisco in 1978. 55 is the day Malcolm McLaren was inspired to market punk fashion in the UK. At 54, Kurt met Courtney for the first time. Moment number 53 was the day Dave Grohl moved to Seattle. The first internet concert was moment number 52, and it's the Depeche Mode Riot at 51. On the next show, we'll look at another riot, a fortuitous act of vandalism, and a note on a bulletin board that ended up changing music history. And remember what I said at the beginning, it's been 20 years since we originally did this series. A lot has changed since the spring of 2004, so feel free to debate this list with others. If you want more like this, there are hundreds of ongoing history of new music podcasts available for free. All the platforms have them. Make sure you follow and like the feed so you never miss an episode. Plus, if you can rate and review, that would be great. We can all meet up on my social media channels. There's my website, ajournalofmusicalthings.com, which is updated every day. Plus, there's the free newsletter that goes with it. And I have another podcast. It looks at the intersection of music and true crime. Look for Uncharted, Crime and Mayhem in the Music Industry, wherever you get your podcasts. And I welcome any emails. Just drop me a line at alan@alancross.ca. Technical production is by Rob Johnston. We'll talk to you next time. I'm Alan Cross.